Welcome to the Daily Counter News Podcast. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing just a quick recap of last week's episode, discussing Ashley Kidwell and domestic trauma, and then we're going to jump right into our episode for this week, which is speaking about Dr. David Nahin and South Carolina's actions of fraudulent drug testing in their children cases. So we got quite a few emails pertaining to last week's episode with Ashley Kidwell, and some people asked us questions. Ashley was committed to Richland Springs Hospital in Columbia, South Carolina, for 7 days. She was diagnosed there with alcohol and substance psychosis and an undefined personality disorder. Now, I guess somebody asked in an email, what happened was she was released by court order in custody of her aunt, and she fell through the system there. She was supposed to be released pending placement, and they never placed her. They just dropped it, basically. This happens a lot with individuals in South Carolina that are released under these sort of court orders. They just kind of fall through the cracks. Some of it is that finding placement is difficult. Some of it is that they just can't locate these individuals afterwards. Ashley, currently, to our knowledge, is still living with her mother, Jamie Domingo Russell, in Elgin, South Carolina. We assume that there's still alcohol and drugs involved in controlling Ashley. Like I said, if anybody has any questions, go back and read the articles we wrote at the Daily Counter News on Ashley, and you'll get a full understanding of what she's dealt with in her past and what she's dealing with currently. The individual that she was in a relationship with, who was helping her and everything, he still wants to help her. He still cares about her, even though she's been with these other men. It's a very, very sad, difficult situation. We wish them the best. So that's where we're going to be at with the recap. So let's jump right in. Who is Dr. David Nahin? Dr. David Nahin was a MRO, a medical review officer. These are people that review documentation, procedures, and stuff in drug testing cases. And all they do is they get a report and they say, okay, this step was followed, this step was followed, and they go on from there. Now, what got us on the Dr. David Nahin was we were contacted a few years back. So we continued to follow it, and we reached out to several people. And when we tried to contact Dr. Nahin, we were told that there was no email for him, that there was no phone number for him. And they wanted to know why we were trying to get into contact with him. So we did. We informed them, hey, we have these parents that are saying this, we're trying to find out what's going on, why he never reached out to them. By regulations, they're supposed to contact the party within 72 hours to find out simply are you on any medication that might give us these results? And which was never done with Nahin. So Nahin never replied back. The company never replied back, which was i3 Logic out of Denver, Colorado, which, as we dug into it more, we actually contacted, the DEA who handles medical licensing, and discovered that Nahin himself had voluntarily given up his license in 1993 for writing opioid prescriptions to himself. He was given what they call a limited license, which allowed him simply to call himself a doctor due to the educational aspect of it. So he was not allowed to see patients. He was not allowed to write prescriptions or anything. So it allowed him to be an MRO still. So as we dug more and more into it, things started questioning. We tried to reach out to the social services, never got a reply back. When we contacted the DEA, they were curious as to why we were looking into him. And I guess what happened a month later, was we were contacted letting us know that, hey, there are some things that they are now questioning. And we were informed the day of that a raid was being conducted by the company that was contracted with Nahin and i3 Logic, which was Premier Biotech out of Greenville, South Carolina. And that morning, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, FBI, and other federal agencies went to Premier, spent all day there, took documentations out. As far as we understand, it's still an ongoing investigation pertaining to these fraudulent drug tests that were being given in South Carolina family courts to separate children from parents. Um, the irony to this was that the next day after our article came out, there was all of a sudden a notice sent out that Dr. David Nahin had suddenly passed away, which we found very uh, auspicious because of the timing. So we let it go at that point, waiting for information from the FBI and everything. So a year later, the Daly County News was contacted by another parent who, out of Chesterfield, stated that they had read our articles on Nahin, that he had passed away, and that they have documentation with his signature on it from that very year, from 2024. So they sent it to us, and sure enough, it was Nahin's signature on a DSS form of 2024, which really piqued our interest because Nahin now had passed away in 2023 and still signing documents for social services in South Carolina. We again reached out to Michael Leach, who at the time was the current director for South Carolina Social Services. Well, Mr. Leach resigned, I believe, in October. And Tony Catone, who was the acting state director, who is the acting state director for social services, who was the general counsel for social services prior to this, on January 2nd. Now, what makes us interested is when we go back and we speak about Michael Leach himself. Michael Leach came to South Carolina from another state as the social services director. And in that state, we won't mention the state, you can look it up yourself, is documented that under his care, under his guidance of the program, thousands of children went missing while in social services care and were later found to be in sex trafficking. So we dug in, and a lot of people nowadays will go to a LinkedIn page. And what we found interesting on Mr. Leach's page is a comment he made basically stating that he can convince anyone of a program that they need. Which to us kind of sounded like a used car salesman speech. I can convince anyone of anything that they need this program and we'll get the funding for it. So Mr. Leach apparently opted to resign from his position and move forward in his life. Now, Tony Catone, who is the acting director of South Carolina Social Services, like I said, was the general counsel for social services, and his background is kind of auspicious as well because he is an attorney who has a degree from Clemson University, degree from USC, University of South Carolina, in business and in law school. So he, again, does not have any social services education, but he is an attorney. We suspect that that's due to the fact that social services is planning on getting major lawsuits from parents for the fraudulent actions that were taken by the department. Now, all these things come into play when you put it all together. Social services has always been a questionable department. And when you involve children, people kind of question very highly. The department's main goal is to ensure the safety of children. So here you have a department with this ability, and yet they're failing miserably. They're causing trauma to children by separating them from loving parents. For what reason, you ask? Well, as it always comes down to, we're suspecting money. The state gets money from federal government for this. The counties get money from that portion. Everybody gets a piece of the pie. So what we question a lot of times is that why are these departments not being monitored by larger entities, by the public? Why are they hiding behind legal structures? Well, because if the public knew how these agencies operated, it would probably not be allowed to go forward any further. Um, Michael Leach in himself, we don't speak ill of anyone. We just state the facts. His background speaks for itself. You have children missing in a department that these children should not be missing. I mean, somebody should be overseeing their foster parents, uh, caseworkers, which leads us into another interesting aspect is most of the caseworkers who work for social services are overworked. We've spoken to several caseworkers around the state, and they've told us flat out that they will have 60, 80 cases on their desk when they're supposed to have like 8. One caseworker we spoke to, she actually had 180 cases that she was dealing with. And she said there's no possible way she could get around to all those cases in a timely manner or in a proficient manner, even. So, what exactly is South Carolina Social Services doing? That is the large question, and it's something we're still writing articles on, and we're still investigating many aspects of it. Um, when you look at these sort of stories and cases, you start questioning what is our society coming to? Where have we gone when it comes to the facts of our children? Family courts, again, are a big part of this aspect of this, for lack of a better term, facade of a judicial system where children are not being held to the most stringent aspect of best interest of a child, which is the family court motto. It all comes down to money. Children are used in many cases for financial gain, whether by the state, by the county, by a parent. So, even in the Ashley Kidwell story, we wrote about how she's a loving mom, how she cares about her children. And as a victim of domestic violence, domestic trauma, they were taken away from her, traumatizing her children. Now, Ashley, again, dealt with things in a unrealistic. We're glad to see. You know, if you have questions or would like to contact us, we have that availability now. You can contact us directly on the show when we're broadcasting at 803-497-8124. And that number is solely dedicated to this podcast. It's 24 hours, 7 days a week. So if you call it, someone will pick up. If they don't, please leave a voicemail. Let us know what your take on it is, what your opinion is. If you'd like to be on the show for next week, we can set up a time and discuss these aspects as we move forward. We don't know why McMaster's chose an attorney to now head social services as an acting replacement. But Nahin himself, when we go back to that aspect, is that's one person who we discovered, who we were directed to. But how many other individuals, such as David Nahin, are out there doing this? It is a very sad story when you start reaching into these. And we were actually told by other journalists that we know to be very careful when we start digging into Nahin, due to the fact that other journalists who've dug into Nahin himself, have been threatened, have been removed from their jobs. Uh, but those are things help children. But for those who are involved in these cases, in these court systems, they walk away with a negative aspect of it. They were not there to help the parents. They were not there to help the families in any aspect. So, what are we doing with a court system that, frankly, is damaging our society or traumatizing our children? Um, it's it's a sad state, you know. Um, Other aspects that pertain to this is the Greenville company, the Premier Biotech. These companies are owned by individuals who have no medical background. These are entrepreneurs who got involved in a project, made some money off it, in the States. We were informed that David Nahin was the sole individual that these social services drug tests were to be sent to, which isn't unusual, we were told, but it raises questions. Why are you sending these tests, for one, to a company in Denver, Colorado, when they're in South Carolina that can do these tests, that can review these aspects? Why are you sending them to this specific individual? So it raises questions that the average person may just not think about, but us as journalists, we're always questioning every aspect. Getting involved. I mean, that's the biggest thing. Is we started this podcast not just to discuss our articles, but to get people in South Carolina involved in these discussions. We want to hear from you what your thoughts are on these articles, what your thoughts are on these. You know, uh, you have used car salesmen like Mr. Leach running state agencies. Uh, you have parents who are losing their children because they're victims of something. It was beyond their control, and they're being held accountable. You know, one of the stories we did, which kind of folds into today's episode, was Richland County, South Carolina, City of Columbia, had a meeting last week, I believe, where they were discussing the creation of a new court system to hold parents accountable for the actions of their children, financially accountable. That is the aspect of family court. So why create an outside entity again to gain more financial foothold in these cases? So what made that story so interesting is they publicly have to announce these agendas, and this agenda wasn't announced until, I believe, 3 hours prior to the meeting. So it was a slip in that prevented people who might have a vested interest in this agenda to come forth and speak out on this. Parents currently can be held accountable for their actions of the children by family courts, by criminal judges. So it's not the need of a new court system, it's the need of a common sense system that is lacking in a lot of cases anymore. So if you want to get involved, if you want to start discussing the articles we've written, please feel free. Like I said, we can be contacted at 803 497 8124 24/7. And we hope more people will start viewing our show, our podcast, not just our articles, and coming on at 4 o'clock and discussing these things openly with us. We have a no holds barred discussion policy here that we want to hear from you, your opinions, your feelings. But at this point, we're going to end today's episode, and we hope we can carry these episodes further and further out with more people joining in. If we have to change the times, if you feel 4 o'clock isn't convenient, let us know. We can move these times around. We have pretty much that flexibility in aspects of this stuff. So again, recap of today is we discussed Ashley Kidwell, uh, what happened to her briefly, the control factor of her mother, who's always been there, who's been a toxic influence on her mom, relationship wise, mental, emotional. Um we spoke about David Nahin, an MRO who worked for a company out of Denver, Colorado, Premier Biotech in Greenville, South Carolina, that aided and was contracted with social services in South Carolina to perform fraudulent drug testing to separate children from parents. Um, so if you have comments or anything, feel free to email us at thedailycounternews.com. Uh, and we hope to get more people involved as the show progresses. Thank you.